15-minute or less lecture series, Anatomy and Physiology, Chapter 18, Water, Electrolyte, and Acid-Base Balance. So, it turns out that the amount of fluids and electrolytes that leave our body need to equal the amounts that come into our body. We need a proper balance between these two things. Because if we have a dramatic change in the concentration of electrolytes in the blood, or the overall amount of water in the blood, this could lead to seriously negative consequences for our body. Basically, we do not want a high salt concentration in our bloodstream. We want the ideal amount of electrolytes and vice versa. So that if we lost, say, 100 mils of blood volume, we would want to be what we lose to be both water and electrolytes so that the overall concentration in the blood would remain the same. If only water left, for instance, then the blood would become overall hypertonic, and that could be bad for our cells. So it turns out that the average adult female is 52% water by weight, because while average males are about 63% water by weight, women tend to have a little less water because they have a little more adipose tissue to give them those curves, and adipose tissue is hydrophobic. We find fluids in our body in various compartments. These include the intracellular compartments, that's inside of cells, the extracellular compartments, such as the plasma of blood, the fluids surrounding our cells, that's the interstitial fluids, and then we have a few isolated compartments called transcellular compartments, such as where the cerebrospinal fluid is found, in the subarachnoid space, in our joints where the synovial fluid is found. Turns out, in general, when you change the composition of fluids in one of these various compartments, you end up affecting all of the compartments. So, for instance, if we ended up with a very excessive amount of water in the bloodstream, that excess water, that dilute solution, will end up coming into the interstitial fluids surrounding our cells. And then this would lead to the cells being in a hypotonic environment, which then means that water would go into the cells. And this could be devastating because it could cause the cells to swell up and lyse. And in the reverse, if, say, the bloodstream was very, very concentrated in solutes and didn't have as much water overall, then water would leave the interstitial fluids going into the bloodstream, and this would put our cells in a hypertonic environment, a very salty environment. And this would cause water to leave the cells to enter the interstitial fluids, and this would cause the cells to dry out a bit, to become crenated and potentially die. So overall, most of our fluid is inside of our cells. 63% of our fluid is in cells. The remaining 37% is in the extracellular fluids, including the interstitial fluid space, the plasma, blood plasma, lymph fluid, and of course those isolated compartments such as within the eyes, the synovial fluid of the joints, serous fluid in body cavities, etc. Even though the overall concentration of electrolytes in the fluids in these different compartments is the same, what is in that fluid, what is dissolved in the water, can be different. So, for instance, in our extracellular fluids, we tend to have high amounts of sodium ions and chloride ions and bicarbonate ions, while inside of our cells, we tend to have high concentrations of potassium ions, phosphate ions, and magnesium ions. These differences in concentrations of specific electrolytes are important because then we can take advantage of these concentration gradients, for instance, for when neurons are functioning and generating nerve impulses. However, the overall concentration is isotonic between the different compartments, ideally. All right, things that can cause movement between compartments include hydrostatic pressure, that is fluid pressure, and osmotic pressure, the overall tendency for water to move in a particular direction. So, for instance, hydrostatic pressure would include blood pressure, the pressure of the fluids in the bloodstream pushing on the walls of the capillaries. This would then lead to fluids leaving the plasma, leaving the bloodstream and entering the interstitial fluid. And then the osmotic pressure, the overall tendency for water, say, to move back into the bloodstream, which could then lead to water returning to the bloodstream. And with osmotic pressure, again, water is going to move in the direction of the hypertonic solution. Again, overall, we want all of our various compartments to be isotonic, to have the same total solute concentrations in the water, even though the solutes don't have to be the same. Because when we have a major movement of water in one direction or another, that could cause an imbalance in our body. So we want that balance to be reestablished via the movement of water via osmotic pressure, or whatever it takes to establish that proper balance. And of course, as we know, for instance, when the fluid pressure in the interstitial compartments gets to be too high, that pressure is released by having fluids enter the lymph system, enter the lymph capillaries. And if it didn't happen, if this was out of balance, then we have too much water building up in and around our cells, in our tissues, and this could lead to edema. So overall water balance, we want the amount of water we take into our body to be the same as going out. Intake, we bring in water by drinking fluids, by eating moist foods, and a little bit, about 10% from metabolism. We do generate a little bit of water by our cellular metabolisms. Whenever the overall blood volume goes down, osmotic receptors will detect this change in blood volume and would send this signal to the hypothalamus, which would then stimulate us to drink by making us thirsty. And then the signal is ended with the distension, stretching of our stomach. So technically, you wouldn't have to drink water to make yourself feel like you're not thirsty anymore. Water output, we lose water by urine primarily, also through our skin and lungs. Water evaporates out of our skin even when we're not sweating. And then, of course, feces and what we do lose from sweating. And the amount of water lost by these various approaches depends on whether it's temperature that we're in, the relative humidity, and whether or not we're very physically active. Urine production, most of the urine's overall volume, whether it's concentrated or dilute, is determined in the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting ducts. So, for instance, the antidiuretic hormone released from the posterior pituitary gland can cause a reduction in the amount of water loss, aka a more concentrated urine. And once we've drunk enough water to get our overall blood volume back up to where we want it, then ADH would be inhibited, and then we would have more dilute urine. So again, the goal is to have the amount of water going in equal the amount of water going out. Electrolytes are very important, so we need to make sure we consume enough electrolytes. Common electrolytes include sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, sulfate, hydrogen ions, and we get these things from the foods we eat and the liquids we drink, and occasionally from metabolism, but primarily the food we eat and the liquids we drink. So sometimes you may get a craving. If you get a craving for something in specific, it may mean that you don't have enough of that particular electrolyte. So a salt craving may mean you're running low on sodium ions. However, try to distinguish that from just something tasting good because it's salty. Regulation of electrolyte output. So we need to control the concentration of sodium, potassium, calcium, etc. As I noted earlier, sodium ions, most of the positively charged ions in the extracellular fluids in the bloodstream and around our cells is sodium ions. Aldosterone, which acts on the kidneys, is hormone from the adrenal cortex, regulates sodium reabsorption, but sodium is saved, and when sodium is saved, water is also saved, leading to more concentrated urine. Aldosterone also regulates potassium ions, causing potassium ions to be excreted at the same time. So potassium ions are increased, adrenal cortex releases aldosterone, we get a reabsorption of sodium ions, which brings in more water, and we get a secretion of potassium ions, so that potassium is excreted. Acids and bases. So hydrogen ions determines our pH. High concentration of hydrogen ions is acidic environment. Low concentration of hydrogen ions would be a basic environment. So electrolytes that release ions that bind to hydrogen ions are bases. Those that release hydrogen ions are acids. We want a proper control of this. Sources of hydrogen ions, byproducts of metabolism and various things that we consume. Some of our byproducts from metabolism include aerobic respiration leading to glucose production, which becomes carbonic acid, anaerobic respiration leading to lactic acid, incomplete oxidation of fatty acids, giving us acidic ketones, and so forth. Strong acids lose their hydrogen ions completely when they're in water. Weak acids and weak bases only partially lose their hydrogen ions, and then these weak acids and weak bases can become what are called buffers and provide a buffer system so that we can resist changes in pH in our bloodstream. We also can use a slower technique to deal with acids and bases in our bloodstream via the respiratory system, breathing in and out, and kidneys. So, extremely fast buffer systems. Chemical buffer systems include bicarbonate buffer system, where carbon dioxide ends up forming carbonic acid, which then gives us carbonate ions and hydrogen ions, or the other way. Phosphate buffer system, going back and forth with the hydrogen phosphates. And of course, the plasma proteins. Turns out the proteins in the blood actually can act as both acids and bases. So bicarbonate system, carbon dioxide can form carbonic acid, which can also form bicarbonate ions, balancing between these two to control pH in the bloodstream. Phosphate system, mono hydrogen phosphate ions versus dihydrogen phosphate ions can go back and forth between acids and bases to control pH in the kidneys. And of course, the proteins can bind hydrogen ions or release hydrogen ions. Respiratory excretion of carbon dioxide. When we breathe out, we're releasing carbon dioxide. When we release carbon dioxide, we get rid of hydrogen ions in the bloodstream. So during exercise, we end up producing lots of carbon dioxide, so we breathe faster to get rid of that excess carbon dioxide so that we don't acidify our bloodstream. So produce lots of carbon dioxide, forms an acid in the bloodstream, respiratory system stimulated, we breathe in faster and deeper, and we eliminate that excess carbon dioxide to control blood pH. We also can control blood pH through the renal system, through the kidneys, by the excretion of hydrogen ions. So nephrons can excrete excess hydrogen ions, which would then make get rid of the acids in the bloodstream, raising the blood pH to more basic levels. So that basically means we have two big categories: chemical buffer systems, which we talked about, which are super fast, and the physiological buffer systems, respiration and renal mechanisms, which is slower. So these all have to work together to help maintain proper pH of our bloodstream, because if the blood isn't the correct pH, then our fluid surrounding our tissues isn't at the right pH, then cerebrospinal fluid isn't the right pH, etc., can lead to major health problems. So the normal blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Anything below that is acidosis, above it alkalosis. Acidosis, pH is too low. This can be caused because of an increase in carbonic acid. Say we're not regulating our breathing in and out correctly, or our air passage is blocked, or we're not getting sufficient gas exchange, basically leading to acidosis in the bloodstream. Metabolic acidosis, say we could be vomiting frequently, could have diarrhea, which leads to a loss of a lot of bases, or we could have kidney problems, kidney failure, which leads to an accumulation of acids in the bloodstream. Symptoms from acidosis: drowsiness, disorientation, labored breath, could even lead to coma and death. Our body, again, will try to compensate for this, but it can only do it to such a degree. Alkalosis, a pH above 7.45. Alkalosis can be caused by problems with breathing, say hyperventilation. It can be caused from anxiety, from fever, from poisons, high altitude. All these things can cause hyperventilation, excessive loss of carbon dioxide, causing the pH to go down, become basic. We also get metabolic causes, gastric drainage for some reason in our stomach, vomiting, causing us to lose gastric secretions, diuretics, basically loss of a lot of acids, or gain of bases. We could decide to over-consume antacid products. Alkalosis, lightheadedness, agitation, dizziness, tectonic muscle contractions, decrease in breathing rate can lead to even more serious problems. Compensate this by chemical buffers, such as producing more carbonic acid to release the hydrogen ions, decreased respiration, decreased excretion of hydrogen ions by the kidneys, etc., etc. Please subscribe and like below.